Okay, so today you guys got two handouts. We have assignment 101, which is your first assignment, and then obviously the exercise that you're doing for class today. We'll go in depth detail about what's going on today after lecture. After the formal lecture, then I'll get into actually how you work in Photoshop. It'll be your introduction to Photoshop, and you'll learn about the basics of layers and how they all work and adjustments and that sort of thing. But a little bit about your assignment 101. Assignment 101, I'm asking for your best photograph, which means you can pick any one that you want, except that it has to have been taken from the start of this semester forward. Okay, so if it was taken over the summer, it doesn't count. Has to be sooner than, or newer than that. You're just going to pick one photo, that's it, and you're going to apply whatever post-processing techniques seem appropriate. Okay, and we'll go through a bunch of post-processing techniques. Doesn't mean that you have to use all of them. It just means that you should select the ones that are the best for it. I will also ask you when you turn it in to write a brief paragraph explaining what adjustments you made to it so that you can have a little bit of verbiage about this is the changes, this is what I did. And I'll also ask you to post the original in conjunction with the edited version. And that's part of how I can see what you did and what techniques you used. Okay? You will also turn in one image that's on 8.5 by 11 paper. It can be printed here at school. It doesn't have to be fancy. I used to have people go out and print it on photo paper at some kind of a shop like Costco or whatever, and it's just too much work. I just want a paper version so that I have a record of it. You will not get the paper version back. Okay? You guys haven't gotten grades back yet in this class. When you get your grades back, you don't get your work back. So I keep the handout, but you'll get a sheet that I write comments on that'll show you your current summary of your grade and all the rest of it. So if you've been in one of my classes before, you've seen those grade sheets before, you kind of know what to expect. We'll go over it when you guys get your first one, but that won't happen until after the first assignment's due. The first assignment is due on the 14th, Monday the 14th. So you've got a little bit of time to work on it, okay? But always good to plan ahead. Okay, so let's talk today about developing a digital workflow and what happens when we actually do some post-processing. And so it's very common for professional photographers, amateur, semi-pro photographers to have some kind of a workflow that they go through that involves some post-processing of images. If you are an exceptionally good photographer, so somebody like an Ansel Adams or something like that, you might not need to do any post-processing. If you're a normal person, you need to do a little post-processing. It's just the nature of photography. You can't quite hit everything perfect. The good news is we have things that will allow us to do the post-processing that will make our images significantly better. So a digital workflow basically refers to a set of steps that you tend to do in response to a photograph. And it's different for each person. And so you have to kind of develop what is your own strategy for this. So some of the key components in a workflow begins by going out and capturing the image in the first place. So you obviously have to take the picture. The next step generally involves getting it from whatever you took the picture with, right, into your computer to do some post-processing on it. This step is starting to get shortened because a lot of times we take an image with our phones and then it magically appears on our computer. So there's not a lot that we have to do, it just shows up. But in the old days of camera with an SD card in it, you have to actually get them from your camera into your computer to start working with it. Next, you're going to do some kind of post-processing of the image. It's usually some kind of a correction. It's almost always a levels correction or a slight curves adjustment. You might crop it, you might rotate it. There might be a few of those kinds of things that you do. And then finally, you're going to output your photos to some kind of a desired media. Right? And again, this step can be very short. Let's say you took a picture with your phone and you applied a filter and you posted it on Instagram. That's a workflow, right? Very easy to do, done, right? It may be something a little bit more involved than that, and we're going to talk through what those involved steps might be, right? Think about whether you already have a workflow. Chances are you probably have at least some piece of a workflow as you go through. The question is, do you actually do the steps that might make your photos a lot better? And those are the steps that we're going to talk about today. You want to think about what software you plan to use. What do you have that's available? Obviously, in this class, we're going to focus a lot on Photoshop. And so if you don't have it at home, you have it in the labs. You can work on it in the labs. And we're going to try to teach you that particular piece of software, right? what type of post-processing do you need to do, right? I know when I shoot images, I almost always have to do a levels adjustment at the end, right? That's just guaranteed step when I shoot. So I can plan for that, okay? Are there any steps you can apply automatically? A lot of software, including Photoshop, has steps where you can automate certain things, so they'll just do it for you. And so you can set that up. It's kind of an advanced topic, but I throw it out there. And then you want to think about how you're going to use your photos. What's the end product? Are you going to make an album? Are you going to throw it on Instagram? What's the purpose? Okay? So what software can you use? Obviously, this class we're going to talk extensively about Photoshop, but I at least want to show you that there are some other options. It's somewhat dependent on whether you're a Windows or a Mac user at what's available for you. Same thing happens whether you have an Android phone or an iPhone, right? So it's interesting as technology evolves and we get more and more dependent on our phones, because I used to only have to talk about what do you do on your actual desktop computer, and now it's a little bit more of a hybrid because half the stuff we do on our phones to begin with, right? Non-destructive editing is always something that's important. Can the edits that we're making be applied on layers that can then be reversed, right? Destructive would be I make a change and it's permanent to the photo, right? We like the idea of non-destructive. We make a change, I didn't really like that, we go back, right? Or 2 months from now we go back, right? So it's not something that's permanent. And is it a free option where we have maybe up to 10,000 images or so, or do we start to get into professional paid options that handle much more in terms of images? So let's talk a little bit about some of the free options. Google Picasa is one of them. It's a photo management application written by Google, still available. This is an older version of it, but you can download it for free and manage your photos through it. It's pretty good. It's well integrated into the Google Plus ecosphere. Picasa web albums to be able to make some web album output. It does have some backup tools built into it, which is always something important. You know that I'm obsessive about backup, so if they're built in, that's always a good thing. It's pretty easy to publish them, whether you're sending them out to be printed or what have you. It is non-destructive in its editing, so that's also good. It doesn't have a plethora of advanced editing options like, say, Photoshop would, but it's got some pretty good basics, and it does a pretty good job of organizing. Adobe has given us something called the Photoshop Express Editor that's available online for free. It is not the same thing as Photoshop. It gives us a very limited set of options that we can work with. You can upload your photo to it, perform some basic edits, download your photo again. The disadvantage here is that it is a destructive editor, right? Obviously you can keep a copy of your original file, but you can't turn on and turn off your particular edits. They're permanent to the image when you download them. It's just fixed. But they're pretty easy to work with it. There are a few advanced features, some filters and stuff that are available. You also have to have a connection to the internet for it to work in the first place. It's also built on Flash, which if you have any iOS device is not included. So you're kind of out of luck there. Pixlr.com is another very similar to Photoshop Express, where they have a bunch of preset options and a bunch of little filters that you can work with. It's kind of amazing what you can do. It has some decent capabilities to it. It's not nearly as powerful as Photoshop, but it's not bad, and it's free, and it's available online. Again, it does require an internet connection to work, right? So Apple used to have iPhoto, and they used to have Aperture. iPhoto was their free version that came on your computer, and then Aperture was the paid version that was like the professional version. I was a big Aperture person, loved it, it was great. Apple decided, nope, we're not offering free and professional anymore, we're just offering one app, get rid of iPhoto, get rid of Aperture, and we have something called Photos now. And it integrates with all your iOS devices, and it integrates on the Mac. It's okay. You know, I like my Mac, I like my stuff, I really liked Aperture. This is okay. But it's there, it's free. For most people, it would be perfectly satisfactory, right? So I shouldn't bash it too badly. But it does have a lot of good features in it. It does have non-destructive editing. Gives us some pretty advanced editing features. We can do levels, we can do curves, we can do a lot of the things that you could otherwise do in Photoshop. But it also gives us some organization options that are a big advantage. They have extensive metadata support. We'll talk about what metadata is in just a second. And we've got the ability to do albums and events, and it'll do facial recognition on who's in the photos. It'll do a lot of stuff, and it's free, which is nice, right? It does sync to your other devices, which is nice. Obviously if you have a Mac and you have an iPhone, it's nice that they talk to each other and the photos that you take on your iPhone end up on your Mac. It's kind of a nice thing. So let's talk a little bit about the professional options. I used to talk about aperture here, but I've obviously cut that part out because Apple doesn't offer it anymore. So we're really down to Adobe products. There's 2 Adobe products that work. One is called Lightroom, and that is essentially a photo management application that controls how you organize your images, how you back up your images, and a lot of the basic edits. So levels, curves, all of that stuff is included in Lightroom. So it's a pretty good application for this. It's a little bit on the expensive side, although now they have a special package that's part of the Adobe Creative Cloud where you can basically rent it monthly. That's the new model. It does have good advanced editing features. You can do selective dodge and burns, stuff like that. Extensive metadata support, great organization of your photos. It'll do facial recognition of the photos, so all of that kind of stuff. And it can handle a lot of images. So the other one is Adobe Photoshop. And again, both written by Adobe. They're meant to go together, not one to replace the other. Photoshop is the gold standard of the ultimate photo editing application, right? It does it all. And because of that, it's also the most complicated of all of them. And so we focus in this class on Photoshop because if you understand Photoshop really well, you'll understand the rest of them and you'll understand what techniques are available in the other application. It will do all the way up to pixel level corrections. So you can zoom in and see an individual pixel and you can change the color of that pixel. And so there are a bunch of techniques and tools that will help you do that, but it is a very accurate, very detailed, highly powerful program. And so we'll talk about that. It does not, however, contain any organizational features. So you can't organize your photos through it. You can just edit one particular photo. And it's important to note that distinction. So if we talk about organizing images, right, if you don't have too many images, it's not a problem. If you have a lot of images, this is important, right? So metadata is something that a lot of people don't realize is included. So you guys, well, you probably don't. A lot of you are too young. Some of the older crowd in here remember the days when you took film cameras and the cameras stamped a date in the corner of the picture, right? Maybe you saw your parents' pictures a while back, right? And they had the picture and it had like an orange date in the corner, right? That was a really cool feature in like the 80s. Like, oh, I can see when I took the picture, right? Well, the good news is now, right, because it's a digital file, we have this file and it contains information about the picture, what the picture looks like, but it also contains a bunch of other stuff that's called metadata, right? And you need some way of reading it, so these programs will help you do it. But it contains everything from what the lens was that you shot with, what the aperture was set, what the zoom level was, right? What the shutter speed was. It contains all that information. It'll contain when you shot it to the second, right, or more, depending on what camera you have. If you shoot it with your phone, it will stamp a GPS location on it, right? So we're getting a huge amount of information that you can't see in the photo, but that's included with the actual digital file. And because we have all the information, we can go back and actually sort by those features. So this is a good example of metadata up here, right? This was shot with my Nikon D80, right? It had an 18 to 35 millimeter lens attached to it, right? I shot at an ISO of 125, 62 millimeter, right? I had no exposure value compensation. It was exactly the way it should have been, right? It was an aperture of 5.6, right? Shutter speed of 1/500th of a second. Includes whatever the file was, the name. Down here we've got a date, we've got a size, we've got a file size, right? And it's also telling me where I stored it. Obviously this is an old image, 2008. But we've got all of this information. If it was current and I shot it on my phone, it would include the GPS location from where I shot it, right? So it's a huge amount of information that's included behind the scenes, which is great. So we can also organize our images in these variety of programs by things like albums, right? Faces, places, right? Those kinds of organization. They're very nice in terms of keeping your stuff organized. Folders are your most basic form of organization, right? I shot a bunch of photos. I put them in a folder. I name the folder, 2015 or something, and now all the pictures that I shot go into that folder. Really simple organization, but it is organization, right? It's generally good for manual organization, like I drop everything into this particular folder. Albums are a little more specific. They're similar to a folder, a little more customization. So you went on your trip to Disneyland. All your pictures from your Disneyland trip go into the Disneyland album, right? So they can be smart albums. So you could say, make an album of all the pictures that I rated 5 stars or better, or something like that. Okay? Events is something that really started with Apple, but it's now prolific everywhere else. And the idea that generally when we go out and we shoot photos, all of the photos happen in certain blocks. Right? I go on a trip, I go on vacation, I shoot a bunch of photos. Right? Then I don't really take any photos for a couple weeks, and then I go to somebody's birthday party and I take some more photos. Right? Well, chances are my vacation photos should all be grouped together, and then I have a break, and then I shoot a bunch of photos at that birthday. All those birthdays should be grouped together. Right? So the computers are getting pretty smart about, we shoot in groups, those groups should be put together, therefore it's an event. Right? Some kind of an event. Which is nice. You can specify how long that event should be. Generally, the computers are pretty good. So the other thing is faces, right? We have the ability to do facial recognition relatively easily. We see with these software packages the very basics of what photo recognition is, right? In terms of, generally, it can pick out my face against, say, my wife's face, right? And if I tell it that it's me, then as we go through, all these pictures are me. The truth is, facial recognition is far more advanced than that. It would not be very difficult for us or for a big company like Google to actually know every picture that was online of you, right? Because if they know you and this is your face, you can do image search, right, and drop that face and compare it. Computers can do that and are very, very good at it, and they can do it. I don't think we're far away from the technology such that, and Google tried this with their Google Glasses, where you could be looking at somebody and would pull up their name and information about them based on facial recognition. So we're not far away from that, right? It's kind of like we're not far away from cars that drive themselves, but that's a whole other topic. So faces are there, right? Places are based on GPS location, right? So you shoot a picture, especially with your phone today, stamps a GPS location on that, and you know exactly where you shot it. Right? You can go back to that exact place. So it's all included. It makes a good organization, right? If I shot a bunch of pictures in Rome, I can pull up all my Rome pictures because they're geographically together. Right? So let's talk a little bit about typical adjustments that are applied to photos. Right? I'll start with the basic ones and we'll get into more complex and we'll talk about what each of these do. So a crop and a resize, right? You might take an image that's larger and you might crop it down. A lot of cropping applications include the grids, so the rule of thirds that I was talking about. You see the grids on it. You can then crop your image based on those rule of thirds. Generally, you can only make the image smaller than it was. I know this seems really obvious, right? But sometimes in Photoshop, you might, oh, let me just make this image a little bit bigger. Well, it doesn't work that way. If you try to do that, it will just add in some pixels that it thinks are the right colors, but it's not really making the resolution any better. So generally, cropping is to make things smaller, right? So we would use the same principles to be able to crop down a particular image, right? We're getting a lot more of the square cropping because of Instagram and the squares, right? So square is a little bit different, but you can still apply similar rules of composition. Exposure is if you have an image that you shot and it really wasn't done correctly, you can make an exposure compensation where you might slide that little slider and say, no, I meant it to be a little bit lighter, or I meant it to be a little bit darker. This works a lot better if you have a raw image, right? So if I have a raw image, I contain all the information and I can make that adjustment after the fact. So here's an example, right? Way too dark here, and then we change the exposure, we get it correctly exposed after. Right? And it can make a big difference. And if you're shooting in RAW, you can do this. Right? If you're not shooting in RAW, it's much, much harder to get that kind of a correction. We could adjust brightness and contrast. Brightness and contrast is kind of like going after something with like a giant paintbrush. It's a very broad stroke adjustment. Right? It's pretty hard to, like, let's say you're trying to do your watercolor in 121 and you're using like a 4-inch paintbrush. Right? It's a very clumsy thing to be trying to do. But it does work. It does work. So you might have something like this that's kind of, ugh, right? And you do some brightness and contrast, you might get something that's a little bit more precise, a little bit better looking. There are better strategies for how you do it, and we'll talk about what those are. Right? Color and saturation, basically, you can increase the amount of color that's in an image. You could decrease the amount of color that's in an image. You could adjust the color. Right? If it's a little bit too orange, you can adjust it to be a little bit more blue. You can make those kinds of adjustments. Right? You can convert images to black and white or sepia tone. Sepia is that brownish tone that a lot of old photographs are. We can do that conversion after the fact. Generally, it's a good idea to always shoot in color. right, and make the black and white conversion after. Right? We can always do more after. Unless you're a really good photographer, don't bother with shooting in black and white. Right? You might as well get the color image first and then do the conversion. Focus is something that can't compensate for a blurry image. Right? Let's say you shot something with your phone and it was kind of blurry and somebody was moving in it. Right? If we deal with focus or sharpening, we can't really improve something that's dramatically blurry, but we can do some very small sharpening. And I don't know whether you'll be able to see this as well on the projector as you can in life. The image on the left is without the sharpening. The image on the right is with the sharpening. And if you look at the pages right in here, there's just a little bit sharper. Right? And what it's looking for is it's looking for tiny little contrasts between black and white, and it's trying to increase those contrasts a little bit. Right? And so it's a subtle change, but it can help an image, it can enhance it. But it's not going to correct a blurry image. Right? That's not its purpose. Red eye reduction. Okay, you guys have probably done this before. You've taken a photo and all of a sudden everybody's eyes look like, you know, raccoons or something, and they're bright red. Done this maybe a few times, right? Did anybody know why this happens? Exactly, right? So when you take a picture, it only happens when you use a flash, right? When the flash goes out, right, what it does is it bounces off the back of your eye, you know, in through your eye, off the back, what's that, the retina, right, the back side of the eye, and it reflects out, and it reflects out red. And so we get a picture, your eyes are red, okay? So what do we do to compensate for that? Obviously, we can fix it after the fact. Right? But cameras will do, you see that they have like red eye reduction, right? And it might blink the flash a few times and then take a picture. Right? When it's blinking the flash, what it's doing is it's making your little iris constrict because it's bright, which is not allowing the light to come back out, right? Because it's smaller. So we're trying to fake your eye into taking a picture without the red eye, basically is the purpose. So we can fix this after the fact. We can go from the reflective red eye. We can basically get rid of that red. Easy to do. Okay, so then we start to get into a little bit more of the advanced changes that can happen. Levels is something we're going to focus a lot on. It's something that I do to almost all of my images. And basically, we work with something that's called a histogram. And the histogram represents a distribution of pixels in a variety of color tones. And so what I'll do is I'll show you the example, and then we'll flip back to this slide, and I'll explain what the graph does in a second. Right? So here's the example. Right? This is the original image on the left. Right? Doesn't have, it's kind of grayish. It's a little bit muted in color. The image on the right really pops out a lot more. And so what we've done is we've said, OK, on this image, there is something that is pure white, and there is something that is pure black. Right? And if I look at it, it's like, OK, well, right here maybe is kind of the whitish area of the image. It's not really bright white, but it's similar. Right? Over here, it's bright white. Okay? So I'm saying, OK, this is approximately where the brightest point of the image is, and that should be bright white. If I look at the darkest point of the image, you know, maybe it's in one of these little cracks, something like that, and that should be black. Okay? But it's kind of a dark gray. So I have a light gray and a dark gray in this image. What I'm doing with a levels adjustment is I'm saying, take this light gray and make it pure white. And take this dark gray, the black, and make it pure black, right, in those shadows. So this is representative by what's called a histogram, this graph. Okay? So black is here, white is here, and this gray little graph here represents the number of pixels that are at some value. So if we said 50% gray is right here, right, I have a lot of pixels that are about 50% gray. Okay? And as we come down here, I have some pixels that are kind of a dark gray, and I have some pixels that are kind of a light gray. But I don't have anything white, and I don't really have anything black. So what I do with a levels adjustment is I change and I tell the computer, right, that pure black is actually over here. And pure white is actually over here. And by pulling that together, I'm giving myself a much better image. It will help a lot when we actually do this live today, and you can see it happen. Okay? So, but I like to try to explain the concept first. All right, curves is to selectively adjust certain parts of the image. Curves are almost impossible to explain in lecture format. We have to actually just do it, right? Because it's very difficult to kind of illustrate. But what's happening is we're taking the light areas of the image and making them lighter, and the dark areas of the image and making them darker, or vice versa. Right? So we're controlling individual pieces of the image. So the light areas can be lighter or darker. The dark areas can be darker or lighter. And we can change those based on a curve. Okay? Final results, right? Printing, web export. Right? Now pretty much our standard exports are Instagram, right? Facebook. Right? Those are the most common. But we might actually print some images. We might make them into an album or something at the end of the year. So there are other outputs as well. Okay. There are a variety of web galleries that are out there. Obviously, Facebook's the most common. Instagram is up there. I don't know which one actually technically is more common. Flickr's great, underused, but they give you a gig of space free, which is fantastic. So you've got plenty of images that you can store on that. Picasa web albums are Google's version of this. Photoshop.com has a gallery format. You could put them on your own site. I mean, there's a variety of options that are out there, and obviously you could actually print them. OK, so we're going to stop on this side of it, and I'm going to flip over, and we're going to go through some actual post-processing. So bear with me for just a second. OK, so we're going to continue on, this time with exercise 105. And we're going to be using a fair number of the tutorials that are, and we're going to go through them. If you're doing this, obviously I gave you the printed version of this, but you can also log into the website. And you can click on each one of the links and go to the next tutorial. So if you go to today's exercise, which is 105, right, there's a bunch of links where you can actually click onto each of these tutorials that will walk through the steps. So for example, we're going to start with 1.1, etc. There is videos of each one of these that will walk you through step by step. So if you get lost, you can go back and you can look at the videos if you're trying to do it from home. I try to make this as step by step as possible. OK, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and open up Photoshop. And one of the things we have to be real careful of on these computers is we have both Photoshop CS3 and Photoshop CS6. Right? You guys want to be using CS6 as opposed to CS3. CS3 is like 8 years old. That's right. So much older. Let's use the newer version. I can get to it by going to All Programs here. And then we're looking for Adobe Design Standard CS6. And we're going to open up Photoshop CS6 right here. OK, so we've gone ahead and Photoshop is open. We're going to talk a little bit about what we're seeing as you start to get familiar with it. Generally, Photoshop is the software that most people are most familiar with, but I still want to go through it so you understand the terminology that I'm using, kind of how I'm setting up my page. So up here at the top, we have our basic menu structure, with our file menu that contains save and those kinds of things. We have edit, which is copy and basic transformations, along with a variety of other things. Under image, we have a lot of kind of primary adjustments that can happen with our image. Layer is something that's critical that we'll discuss in more detail. There's a layers palette that I'll explain in just a second. And then we go through here. There are filters that are available. We can change the various view styles that we're looking at. And there's windows, etc. Okay? Below that, directly below that, is a bar that contains information about whatever tool we have selected. Right? So right now I have the rectangular marquee tool selected. It contains information about the rectangular marquee tool. If I had the move tool selected, you see that this changes and I get information about move. Right? If I came down here to the brush tool, right, the paintbrush, I'd have different tools again. So this bar that runs across the top changes based on what tool you're actually using. Right? On the left side here, I have a bunch of standard tools that are used. This is the most common set of tools. There are a lot more tools that are available to you, but we stick with the most common on the workspace here. Okay? On the right side, at the very top, we have a drop-down menu that's called Essentials. Right? But there's also a bunch of other options that are available here. So if we were dealing with photography, we might switch into the photography preset that gives us a different set of information. Right? Essentials is the most common, but we also can deal with typography, motion, painting, etc. Right? So I'm going to leave it on Essentials for right now because it's just the default. OK. Below that, we have basically a panel that gives us adjustments, right, or adjustment presets. Below that, we have something called layers, channels, and paths. We'll work with just layers for right now, and we'll get to channels and paths in a little bit. Layers is absolutely critical for everything that we do in Photoshop. The layers are going to appear right down here as we move forward. So I'll point that out a little bit more as we continue on. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to open an image to work with. And you guys are going to pick 3 images today to work with, and you're going to make 6 versions of those 3 images. So you're going to end up making 18 total images. Right? I'm going to pick one and go through it so you can see as I do it step by step, and you're going to repeat it. Okay? So I'm going to go to File and then Open, and I'm going to jump to my flash drive here, assuming that it's plugged in, which of course it is not. There we go. Maybe. Okay, so I'm going to start with my first image. It opens up such that it fits. I want the image to be a little bit larger, so I'm going to press the Control key and then the 0 key, and that'll fill the available space that I have on my screen with the image. Right, so I have the largest space possible. Okay, so I started with this image. You can pick any image you want and apply these adjustments. Some of the adjustments will look better than others. I will actually use a couple different images as I go through today because I want to be able to show you what they do. In some images, nothing really happens when you try to adjust it. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to think through is making an image in black and white. And so I'm going to follow, right, this Photoshop 1.1 exercise, right, and I'm going to follow through these steps. Okay? Now, a lot of times if people aren't very familiar with Photoshop, the first thing that they'll do is they'll go up to Image, and they'll go to Mode, and they'll say Grayscale, right, which basically will convert it to black and white. Now we notice when it happens, right, it says, are you sure you want to discard this color information? To control the conversion, use Image Adjustments Black and White. Right? So we're saying, wait a minute, maybe you don't want to do it this way, which is correct. So we're going to do it using something that's called an adjustment layer. And the advantage of doing an adjustment layer is that anything that we do is really easy to turn on and turn off. And we can do any combination of the adjustments by turning them on and turning them off. So I'm going to start, and I'm going to go up to Layer, and then New Adjustment Layer. And from here, I'm going to pick, let me just double check which one it is. Channel Mixer. That's what I thought it was. So I'll go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and I'm going to pick Channel Mixer. Okay? And so I can name this layer, Channel Mixer. I'm going to name it Black and White, or B&W, so that I know this is the one that's turning it to black and white. And I'll go ahead and say OK. And you see over here that I now have an image that's called background, and then I have an adjustment layer that's sitting on top of it. And this works exactly like when you're drawing and you have layers of trace, right? And you put another layer on, you draw some on it, then you put another layer on, and you draw some more on it. Okay? Layers are great like that. So the other thing that's happened is this little properties window has popped up, right, that says Channel Mixer on it. I have my black and white layer highlighted in light blue over here. And so from here, right, you can see that there's a checkbox for monochrome. And if I check that box for monochrome, it will convert my image from color to black and white. And of course, on the on-screen version, you guys can't really tell. Such is life. Okay? So when I do that, right, it's turning to black and white, and obviously I can see it. Those of you that are following along, you can see your image turning to black and white. But there's also something called Preset up here. And under Preset, we have black and white infrared, black and white with a blue filter, green filter, orange filter, red filter, and yellow filter. And so this simulates if you were actually shooting old-fashioned with a camera, you might put a special filter on your lens that adjusts how the image is coming in. What I would recommend doing is start with the infrared, right, and take a look at your image and see, do you like it? Right? If you don't like it, move on, try the blue filter. And you can see that each time I switch, right, I get a different looking image, right? And a lot of times it's easier when you're working with your own images to see which one actually looks right, right? And so as I go through and I try each one, I think the red filter was the best, right? Gave me a little bit more contrast in the clouds, so I'll stick with that as my filter. Okay? Once I'm done, I don't really have to do anything. I can choose to minimize this properties window by clicking the little double arrow, and that'll go away. And we can now see that I have an image called black, or have a layer called black and white on top of background. So the great thing is that I can turn it on and turn it off. So there it is with blue sky, and we can actually see it. And then I can turn on black and white, and it now turns into the gray color. Right? So because it's a layer, I can turn it on and turn it off very, very easily. Right? And I've also chosen that particular preset. If I want to go back and adjust what I applied in my adjustment layer, I can click right here. Right? This icon in the layer represents the adjustment. I can click on it, and it'll bring back up, and we can see that I have black and white with a red filter. Okay? If I wanted to do some kind of a custom adjustment, right, I could go to custom and make my own. For the most part, the presets are fine, so we don't need to worry about creating one of the customs. Okay? So I'll go ahead and minimize that again. So let me go ahead and turn that off. That's the first piece. Actually, let me turn it on. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this image so that I have, right, this as an output. So I'll go up and I'll go to File, Save for Web. And I'm going to change the preset here to be JPEG. And it's JPEG high. If I press Control-0, I can see the whole image. There we go. There it is. And then when I click Save, right, I'm going to save it. Let me make a folder. So I'll call this image 1-VW. And I like to add _web because I know it's a version that I saved out for the web. So I'll go ahead and click Save. And now I have this black and white version. I should probably go ahead and save the original. So let me turn off this layer so that I get back to my color. And we'll go to File, Save for Web. Again, I can press Control-0 to see the whole image. I'll click on Save. And I'll change VW into original. And I'll click Save again. So now I have an original, and I have my black and white. So from here, we're going to move on, and we're going to do another adjustment. And so this is Photoshop 1.2, adjusting levels. And so I'm going to go up to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and I'm going to pick Levels. Okay? And we'll go ahead and leave that as Levels, and I'll go ahead and say OK. And we see that histogram, that graph that I was talking about before. Right? And what this is doing is it's saying where is black and where is white. So if I look at my image, because it's this kind of bright sun image, I have a pretty bright white spot. So I don't need to do much with the adjustment for where white is, because I already have kind of pure white in my image. I do not, however, have a pure black. And so if we look at the graph, I have kind of a dark gray. And I guess it would be down in here maybe. That would be my darkest plate pieces. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this little black triangle, and I'm going to pull that over. And we'll see that it's taking these areas in here that are in kind of the sand, and as I drag it over, it's making them darker, right, almost to a black. Right? So this is made a pretty dramatic change to the image, right? Where before I had this that was kind of washed out, I've now really brought out the grass and the footprints in the sand, etc. Right? So I'm going to go ahead and close this, and now I have a levels adjustment. I'm going to save that in a second, but I'm going to show you a couple other images where I do levels adjustments. So let me open a few more. Right, so let me press Control-0 on this image. Right, if I go up to Image, or excuse me, Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Levels. Okay. Right, here's another example. Again, I have clouds in the sky that are already pretty close to white, but I don't have a nice pure black in this image. So if I want a pure black, I can drag this. Basically, you're trying to drag this point to right about where the graph starts. Right? So I have a little bit of a taper here, but I can pull it a little bit past that, and then when I start going up, that's where I want it to be. The white point, I could pull over just a little bit. Right? And so we can see what the image was before, a little bit washed out, to what it becomes once you have that levels adjustment. Right? I can do it again for, say, this image. Right? So we'll go Control 0 so that it's as big as it can be. And I'll go to Layer, New Adjustment, Layer, Levels. The reason that I'm doing this to a variety of images is just so that you can see it. Right? So in this case, I'm getting closer to the edges of this image. If I pull this over just a bit, I'll get a little bit more black. And if I pull this over just a bit to the white, I'll get a little bit more white. So this one didn't involve as much adjustment. Right? It was a smaller adjustment. So there it is before, there it is after. It just brightens up just a little bit. Okay? So let's go back to this original one that I was working with. I now have the levels adjustment that's applied. I'm going to go to File, Save for Web. Again, Control 0 will show the whole image. I'll go ahead and press Save. And we'll call this Levels. And I'll click Save. Now, if you chose to keep the black and white on, right, the levels adjustment would still apply. So there it is in black and white, and they're independent. So there it is without the levels. There it is with the levels. So it still adds to the image. Black and white, independent, whether it's color or black and white. So you see how when I'm working with the layers, I can selectively turn one on or one off, depending on what I want to do. So it's very, very flexible, and that's part of the advantage of Photoshop in the first place. OK, so then we're going to do curves next, which is Photoshop 1.3. And so if I go to here, we can pull up the working with curves. Right? And one of the things that helps with curves is I have some images here that will kind of identify what's happening and how we're making the adjustments so you can follow along. I'm going to go ahead and do it over here live. I'm going to turn off my previous layers and go back to my just plain original layer. And I'm going to go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Curves this time. I'll go ahead and say OK. And I get a different graph. Okay, so this curves graph is different. The line that goes diagonally from here to here, right, represents the image from black to white. Okay? What I can do is anything in the upper part of this image is making the image lighter. Anything in the lower part of this graph here is making the image darker. But I can control what point is getting lighter and what point is getting darker. So I'm going to start here in the middle just to illustrate this point. If I click and I drag from the middle, right, the whole image is going to get lighter, or the whole image is going to get darker. Okay? So that's a pretty broad stroke adjustment, the whole thing. If I don't want to do it quite that broad, I can say, OK, again, I left the point in the center. Let me take a point that's right here, halfway up in the lighter section of the image, and I can control just the lighter section of the image and determine whether the lighter section gets darker or gets lighter. See how I'm really just adjusting the sky? Right, and a little bit of the shadows. So let's say I pop this up just a little bit, make that a little bit lighter or a little bit darker, depending. Right? I'm going to go a little bit lighter. Then I can control the darker part of the image here, right? And you can see this primarily. See how the sky isn't changing at all? Right? It's just the lower part of the image that's changing. So now I can change the lower part of the image to be a little bit darker. So I'm like that. So this, if we look at it, is kind of like a very tapered down S. Has a little bit. And this is the most traditional adjustment in curves that you can make. You can actually see it up here in the icon that represents curves. It's that subtle S curve. That's generally the adjustment that you'll make using curves. Okay? You can also get things pretty wacky, where you can flip the graph and get things not to look at all like reality. So it's with curves, it's assuming you want not a surreal image, generally it's going to be a very subtle adjustment, a slight S curve to it. Right? And so we can turn it on and turn it off, and you can see that it's changed the image just a little bit. Right? And it's generally a combination of curves and levels that can really enhance the image nicely. Okay? So really with curves, you have to kind of play around with it and see what happens. The key is that the upper part of this graph here represents the lighter portion of the image. The lower part of this graph represents the darker portion of the image. And the two work independently of each other. Right? I don't have to be limited to just these 3 points. Right? I could add another point and control the really light part of the image, right, depending on what I wanted to happen there. Right? We could darken that really light part up. So you see that I can make it more complex than it is right now. And you really have to play around with what it's doing in looking at the preview to decide how much to push with curves. Okay, so that's curves. So let me go ahead and say File, Save for Web. Now in this instance, I left curves and levels on. That's perfectly okay. Right? I can choose which pieces I want to be left on. I'll go ahead and click Save, and we'll call this Curves. And I'll click Save. Perfect. The next one, we're going to pop the color a little bit. And so we're going to follow Photoshop 1.4. Right, so if we jump back here, go to 1.4. This is going to make the images pop a little bit. It's not going to show too much. This works particularly well in sunsets or images with a lot of vibrant color in them, flowers, those kinds of images. So I'm going to switch over to one of these other images so that we can see kind of how it adjusts the color. Again, it's fairly subtle, but it can really make a big difference in the long term, especially if you're doing a print of this image. Okay, so I have this, and I want to make the color saturation just pop a little bit. So I'm going to go to Layer, Adjustment Layer, and I'm going to go to Channel Mixer again, right, which is what we used for black and white, but I'm going to do something different. So instead of checking the box for monochrome and making it black and white, which defeats the purpose of the sunset picture in the first place, what I'm going to do, oh, come on. I shouldn't have done that as an example. Give me a second. Let's go back. Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Channel Mixer. All right. So I'm not going to mess with that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to be, if we see here it says Output Channel Red, I'm going to control just the red for right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the amount of red. So we'll go up by like 116. Right? And I found 116, 118, something like that to be okay. But you see here that as soon as I change that to 116, the image ends up being a little bit more red. But I also get under green and blue, I get zeros. But I get a triangle and a plus 116. Right? It means my percentage is off. So I'm going to, instead of going 116 here, 0, 0, I'm going to do -8 and -8 in the blue and the red channel. Or excuse me, in the blue and the green channel. So 116, -8, -8. Then we're going to switch the output channel to green. And I'm going to bump up the green to 116 and go -8 and -8. And then I'll go last to the blue, and I'll go up 116, -8, and -8. Okay? And so what that does is it pushes, right, the color saturation just a little bit on each of those primary colors. And so if we look at it with and without, right, yeah, on the screen it's a little bit hard to see, but obviously on your computer you'll see it a little bit more. It just pushes a little bit more of those colors. Those are the numbers, or those are the values that to me seem about right without pushing it too surreal. If I wanted to, I could push it further. So if I went to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and let's go to Channel Mixer. And let's say instead of, let's go to the red channel, instead of 100, I could do, I don't know, 150. Okay? And I could do -25, oops, and -25. So the math still is the same. Right? And then we could go to the green channel, 150 minus, oops, -25, -25. And then I could go to the blue channel, -25, 5, and 150. Okay, so if I look at this one now, right, you guys might be able to see it more, right, on the projector. But if I'm looking at it on my computer, it's really oversaturating the colors. It's starting to look a little bit too far, right? But the point is, the math still works, and you can choose what value. I suggest 116, 118 or so, because that seems about right for me in my experience. But if you want to push it a little bit more and take a look at what it looks like, there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, so let me go ahead and do it to this image. You're going to do each of these to the images that you pick, even though some of them might not really do anything. So in this instance, it's not going to do a whole lot, but I'm going to do it anyway. So I'll go to Image, Adjustments, oh, excuse me, Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Channel Mixer. Go ahead and say OK. And We'll do this at 116, minus 8, minus 8. Red. All right, so I have that again applied, and I'm going to go ahead and turn on my curves and my levels because it enhances the image a little bit more. And I'll go ahead and go to File, Save for Web, press Ctrl-0, save, and I'm going to call this Pop. And I'll go ahead and click Save. And there we go. OK, so the next and last one is Photoshop 1.5. And that is to do dodging and burning on an image. And dodging and burning is a holdover term from the old days when you worked in a dark room to develop your film. And you would add certain chemicals to a dish and expose your images, or not expose your images, but process your images. And depending on what chemicals you had or how long you left certain chemicals on the developing paper, it would change what the end result of your image would be. In Photoshop, we can do this without having to use chemicals in a reversible manner. And so I'm going to show you the ideal way of doing this. We could just pick the Dodge and Burn tool, which is right here, and start applying it directly to our image. It doesn't, unfortunately, work as well as applying it to a separate layer that you can then manipulate after the fact. Right? So this is more of a permanent change. I would rather apply it to a layer. So we're going to follow 1.5, dodging and burning images. Right? And this will walk us through how it works. What I'll do is I'll go up to layer, and previously we've been doing new adjustment layers each time. Right? This time I'm just going to say new layer. So layer, new layer. And in the little dialog box that pops up here, I'm going to go ahead and call this Dodge and Burn. Right? And I'm going to do something different here. I'm going to change my mode right here to Overlay. And I'm going to check this box for fill with an overlay neutral color of 50% gray. So I'm making sure that I adjust where it says Mode, and I'm checking that box. Right? And that's critical because this won't work unless you do this. Okay? So this is just a plain layer with a mode of overlay, and we're going to explain next class extensively what blending modes are and what this mode means. But for right now, you're just going to change it to overlay. I'm going to check the box for fill with an overlay neutral color, and I'll go ahead and say OK. And we see over here that I have a layer called D and B, and it looks like it's just a square with gray in it. Okay? On this layer, with it selected, kind of in this pale lightish blue, I'm going to come over to the Dodge and Burn tool. And there's two different ones, and they're hidden underneath each other. Burn darkens, Dodge lightens. So we're going to start with Burn, which is kind of a hand tool. And I can come up here, and remember these are my tools that are available with a given tool. Right? So I'm using the Dodge, or excuse me, the Burn. And I'm going to change the brush size, right, to be a little bit bigger. And I can look over here at my image, and I'll see a circle for kind of how big that is. Right? And we're just trying to get a reasonably large brush, something like that. The other option is we can use the bracket keys to increase or decrease the size of the brush. So if I hold down the bracket, you can see that I can make the brush bigger. For me, I tend to use the bracket keys, but I have to show you that there is an actual panel that controls the brush. Okay? So once I have the Burn selected here, right, and my layer, my Dodge and Burn layer selected, what I can do is I can start to kind of color in, and you can see that it's darkening up the sky wherever I click and drag. You see how that's happening? Right? So I'm deliberately kind of darkening this part of the sky, giving a little bit more color. I could really push it, right, where I can dramatically darken up the sky, something like that. Right? The other thing that I can do is I can do the opposite, which would be the Dodge tool, and this is going to lighten. Again, I have to adjust my brush size a little bit. Right? If I want to use the bracket keys, I could do it that way. Right? And so maybe I want to lighten up down in here just a little bit because it's a little bit too dark. Something like that. Right? I can make the brush a little bit smaller here, and we could lighten up this grass just a little bit. Make this a little bit bigger, and let's lighten that up. All right, so something like that. And again, it's based on what looks right for you. Right? And if we look here where I used to have that solid gray square, I now have kind of a mottled black-white combination. That's representing what I've changed. And so if I turn on or turn off, right, we can see that I've made some pretty serious changes using dodge and burn. Okay? The advantage, again, of doing it on its own layer is that if I didn't like something or if I wanted to change it, I could continue. Right? Let me go back to, say, I'll leave the dodge tool on. Let's say I didn't like how dark I made the sky. Right? I can come back in here, and I can go ahead and I can lighten up the sky using the dodge tool, and we can go backwards. Right? If I hadn't done it on its own layer, I couldn't do this. It would end up just muddling the colors. So we really want to make sure we do it on its own layer as we control it. Okay? So then I'll save this image. So I'll go to File, Save for Web. Again, Control-0 will show the whole image. I'll click on Save. And this is dodge and burn. And I'll go ahead and click Save. And so now I have 6 images of the first image that I picked. Right? You're going to go through the same process, right, for 3 images. So if I were doing this, I would jump over to my next image, say it's this one. I would do all the steps for this one and get 6 images of this. And then I move to my last image and do the same set of steps. So original plus 5 different adjustments. You can choose to add the adjustments together. Right? So for example, I could leave all of my adjustments on to get the end result. Right? Or I could turn off selective ones. So let's say I wanted a color version instead of a black and white version. The truth is that if we go back to my original image, like this, right, and then we start to add these images. Oops, let me turn these off. Okay, we go back to the original image like this. If we start to add these together, if I have black and white on, okay, that gives me a black and white image. But if I turn on the dodge and burn, that changes the black and white image. If I turn on the channel mixer, that changes it. If I turn on the curves, that changes it. And ultimately, I can stack each of these on top of each other and create something different. Right? But again, it doesn't matter for what you're turning in, whether you have them all on or just certain ones on. Right? The point is that you have 6 images, original through. So when it comes time to actually post, actually I'll let you guys do this for a little while, and then I'll show you the posting so I don't give you too much to do. Okay? So there appear to be several of you that are getting to the point where you're starting to do your posts, so I want to make sure that I talk about the posting even if you're not quite there yet. I'm not in any way saying that you should be there. I'm just trying to make sure I'm ahead of the people that are getting to that point. Because when you create the post, there's a little bit of a different step involved, and because we're posting so many images, it's nicer if they show up as a slideshow of images rather than just a dump of images. So when you go ahead and you create your post this time, you're going to go to New Post, and you're going to give it its title. So this is Exercise 105. And then while I'm here, I'm also going to go ahead and categorize it. So I'll come here. .105, and I'll set my featured image while I'm here. So I'll upload my files, and I'm going to pick it off my flash drive. And we'll take this one. All right, so let me set that as a featured image. Now is when I'm going to end up uploading all of my stuff. So the first thing that I'm going to do is right here under Format, I'm going to change from a standard post to something called a gallery, which is going to allow me to have a bunch of images in kind of a slideshow format. So I check the box for gallery, and this is written out on the back of your handout today. So if you get lost, it's no big deal, and of course I'll come around and help you. And then I'm going to check this little slider here for slideshow on post page. It should turn green, and that means it's going to show up as a slideshow. And then I'll come up to the tab right here that says gallery, And this will allow me to add all the images at once, so I don't have to upload them individually. So I'll click on Insert Gallery or Add Images. And I'll go ahead and go to From Computer, select Files, and I'll actually just hold down Shift and select all the files at once. And click on Open. And it's going to work through these, and it takes a little bit of time. Especially you guys are going to be uploaded 18 images, so you just plan on it taking 5 minutes or so. It'll go to 100%, and then it'll say crunching, and then it'll go to the next one. And so you just have to let it kind of do its thing for a bit. And so just like you, I have to wait. Okay, so once it's done, I can click on Save All Changes. And after I click on Save All Changes, I'll have a button for Insert Gallery. And so I can go ahead and click on Insert Gallery, and it will drop the gallery into my post. I can click Publish once I'm done, which I will do. And then we can view the post to see what the end result was. And so I get my images in these little thumbnails, but I also get a slideshow that goes through all of my posts. So I didn't have to do much. I just had to check a couple boxes, and now I have a slideshow. Keeps the organization a little bit better. You're going to create one post with all 18 images in it. So like I said, just be patient when you're uploading. The other thing that happens is toward the end, everybody's trying to upload, so you have to be a little bit more patient while it does it. Okay? If you have trouble with this, just let me know, and I'll walk you through it. But we're going to do this for the next couple posts, so you'll get used to it.